as we go through these next examples in section 10.1, we're going to be using our percent equation. So there are a bunch of different ways to do percent problems. We can set up ratios or proportions. We can use a formula, which is what we're going to be concentrating on. And you can kind of do these problems a bunch of different ways. So if you have a way that you prefer that's different than the way I'm going to go through these, feel free to do so. But the reason I'm choosing to talk about this as a formula is as we go through this chapter, chapter 10 is going to be using a bunch of different types of mathematical formulas, and a lot of them dealing with percents. So we're going to kind of get started and talk about these formulas as they are using our percents as decimals, and kind of working through these this way. So our basic percent equation is part equals percent times whole. So as we're going through and we're solving these problems, we could be looking for one of three different things. We could be looking for our part, we could be looking for our whole, or we could be looking for our percent. So if we are looking for our part, we're actually going to end up multiplying. So we are going to end up multiplying to get our part. So if we look at this first formula, part equals percent times whole, right? We're doing a multiplication right there. Right? Then also here, we have a statement that says that we're going to divide to get our percent or whole. Right? So if we're looking for our whole, we're going to divide. If we're looking for our percent, we're going to divide. Now, you can work on remembering these different things. We're multiplying if we're getting our part, or we're dividing if we're looking for our whole or our percent. But the only tricky thing is with division, it kind of depends on what number comes first, right? What number comes first matters with division. So what I'm going to do as we go through these next few examples is I'm going to write out a list of things that I know, and then I'm going to use my basic percent equation, part equals percent times whole, to finish off these problems. So for example 4, we're going to start off with A. We're asked to find the missing value using our percent equation. Right, so I'm going to start out by writing a list of things that I know. Right? So things that I know in this case. I know that my percent is 22%. As we're going through and we're using these formulas, notice that up above I have written that we're going to use our percent as a decimal. So we want to make sure that we're using our percent as a decimal, which means we're going to shift our decimal point 2 places. Right, so 22% is going to be equivalent to 0.22. Right? In this case, our whole is 85. Right? So one kind of key thing is, as we're looking at these, if you're looking at just kind of a general sentence, when we're thinking about a percent formula, we have our part equals percent times whole. After the multiplication sign is the whole. Well, sometimes we use the word of to represent multiplication. So in this case, what comes after the word of? Well, that's 85. That means that 85 is our whole, because that's that number that's after the word of. Right, and then is what number? Well, that's what we're looking for. So the part is what we are looking for in this problem. Okay. So we're going to go through and we're going to plug these into our formula. Right? Part equals percent times whole. So we're going to plug in the information that we just listed here. So our part is going to be our percent, 0.22, times our whole, which is 85. Right? Feel free to use a multiplication symbol. Feel free to use parentheses, whatever's most comfortable for you. So we're going to take these and we're going to multiply. As we're going through, and I don't think I've mentioned this yet, feel free to use a graphing calculator, a scientific calculator, whatever calculator you may choose. So if we type 0.22 times 85 into our calculator, our P is going to be equal to 18.7. So 22% of 85 is 18.7. All right, we're going to do a couple more using our basic percent equation. So we're going to start these next two the same way. We're going to start out by listing what we know, and then once we have a list of what we know, we're going to work on finding what we don't know. All right, so 60% of what number is 45? So again, percent's always easy to pick out because we have a percent sign after the number. After the word of, well, we don't know what comes after the word of. And remember, our whole is what comes after the word of. So in this case, we don't know our whole. Right? Our part is 45. Right? So we're going to use our percent formula. part equals percent times whole. And we're going to plug in the numbers that we do know. Well, our part is 45. Our percent, 60% is 0.60 times W. We have a little mini one-step equation here. We have to get rid of this coefficient of our variable. We want to get rid of that 0.60. Right, that way these cancel. Right, those cancel. We're just left with a W. And then into our calculator, we're going to type 45 divided by 0.60, and we get 75. So 75 is our whole. Going back to the previous page, notice that we did have a little formula that directly gave us our whole. Our whole is also our part divided by our percent. So if you don't want to use our general formula, we could write out a direct calculation, right? That our whole is equal to our part divided by our percent, which is exactly what we did over here, right? We took our 45 divided by our 0.60 to get that answer of 75. Right, so as you're working through these problems, you have options. Pick whatever you're most comfortable with. If you just want to remember one formula, then just remember a general formula. If you want to work through it directly, save yourself a step, feel free to do that as well. Okay, then for C, what percent of 27 is 15? Well, in this case, we don't have a percent. That is what we are missing. The number that comes after the word of is 27. Remember, what comes after the word of is our whole. Right? That means that by process of elimination, our part has to be 15. Okay? So we're going to start part equals percent times whole, and then we're going to plug in what we know. Our part is 15. Our percent is what we're looking for. Right? It's multiplied by our whole, which is 27. Again, we're going to solve a simple one-step equation. We're going to get rid of that number that's next to our variable or our percent sign here. So we're going to divide both sides by 27. So our percent, if we divide 15 by 27, we get a decimal, and that decimal is going to repeat. We're going to get 0.5555, so on and so forth, and we're going to keep repeating that 5. Right, so one way we can indicate repetition using decimals is by using a horizontal bar over our number, right? In this case, our number 5 is just being repeated over and over again, so we can put that over one of our number 5s, right? But in this case, we also want to think about this as a percent, not just a decimal. So we're going to take this decimal point and we're going to shift it over 2 places. And then as we shift it over 2 places, we're going to round that last decimal. And since at that decimal we're getting 55555, we're going to round up. So we're going to end up with 55.6% for our final answer. So this is going to be one of those cases where if we see something like this in my math lab, we're going to want to be very careful that we are rounding correctly, putting our decimal point in the correct spot, giving our answer as a percent rather than as a decimal, and rounding to as many different place values as we're being told to. So maybe we're being told to round to our first place value, which is the 10th. Maybe we're being told to round to our second place value after our decimal point, which is the 100th. So as we're going through, just pay careful attention to your rounding. There is a short video that goes through a couple of rounding examples in case that's something that you want to go through and review. But just, I cannot stress enough at the beginning of the semester how important rounding is when we're entering our answers into my math lab. Okay, so that being said, like the problem before this, we could also work through this problem directly. So if we were to go back to the previous page, we're also told that percent can be found by using division. Right? So our percent can be found by taking part divided by whole. Right? So in our case, our part was 15 divided by 27, right? Which is what gave us that repeating decimal that we were just looking at, which then we changed into a nice percentage. So as we're going through these, this section and working through these problems, You just want to be sure that you are comfortable with your basic percent equation. Again, if you don't want to think about it as equation, but you have a different way that you want to work through these, that's definitely fine. Just make sure that, again, your answer is correctly rounded when you are ultimately done with the problem that you're working on.